Hey CodeCrew, in the last lesson we parsed the JSON response from the YouTube Data API. In this video, we're going to set up our user interface by adding a UITableView element, and we're also going to set up a custom protocol so that our model can send over the video objects to our view controller for displaying the videos inside the table view. Just a quick note, if you're jumping into the series at this point, you kind of need to watch these lessons in a progression for it to make sense. First, make sure you've watched the 29 lesson beginner series to get the basic skills. Then make sure you're watching this YouTube app one day build lessons in order. Links to both of these playlists will be in the description. Just in case you missed that little video in between lessons 3 and 4, where I teach you how to correct the mistake of accidentally committing your API key to a public repo, I think it's worth repeating here at the beginning of this lesson. Now, if you did see that, then feel free to skip the next 2 minutes or so. So in lesson 4, I warned you about how not to commit your API key into the public repository like I did, and I showed you how I corrected it. But there's actually a more foolproof way to stop yourself from committing that API key. So that's what I want to show you right here. So remember when we created our repository, we actually had this file called Gitignore. And if I just open up this file, it specifies everything that should not be added to the repo when you commit your project. So what we're going to do is we're going to put constants.swift in this file list. And I'm going to save it. And if you don't see this file here because it is a hidden file, what you can do is you can go into terminal, go into your project directory and say open Gitignore. And that should launch it. Now, you can still see that file there. Now, what's going to happen now is that if you had done this right when you created the constants.swift file before you pushed anything, then that file would get ignored. But the fact is right now, I have already committed it to the repo before, and this file is being tracked. So I have to do an additional step is to tell my source control to stop tracking this file. So the way I do that is inside here, I go git rm, which stands for removed, and I'm also going to add this flag called cached, which makes sure to actually remove this from any cached indexes that keeps track of like a file list of files that it's tracking. And then I specify that file name. Okay, actually I'm not in the right directory, so it didn't find that file. So if I just go maybe one deeper. So in here I actually, okay, now I see that file. So I'm gonna run the same command. And just in case you didn't know, you can actually press up and down to go through a list of your previous commands. So there, I'm gonna run this command again. All right, so now let's do git status. And you can see that this was deleted. It's going to delete this file from the repo. And it also says here that we modified the gitignore file. And so we're going to want to add that change. But I want to point out another change that it's picked up here, that there's a constants template.swift. So what is this? This is what I'm looking at here. So instead of committing constants.swift, which actually has my API key in it, I created this constants template.swift, and this is the file that I am going to put onto GitHub instead. And as you can see, it's commented out, it's got my API key and sort of any identifying information removed. And I've just added an instruction here to say to add your own keys below and uncomment this code. So anyone downloading my code from my repo is not going to get constants.swift, which contains my personal information. Instead, they're going to get this file, constants-template.swift, and they're going to have to add their own IDs and keys and then uncomment this, and the project will build. So that's what this is. So let's say git add space dot, and then if I go git status again, you're going to see that there are still some files that aren't being tracked. I'm not sure why. So let me take a look at that again. Let me try to add everything again. Okay, so that seems to have worked. I am going to now commit everything. modified Gitignore to stop tracking constants.swift, added constants template.swift instead. And yeah, so that's what we're going to commit. So we're going to push that. Okay, so now let's take a look at what we have. Yeah, so now it doesn't have constants.swift. Instead, in our repository, we have constants template.swift. And as you can see inside here, all of this is commented out. But when you download this code, you're going to have to change the API key and the playlist ID and just uncomment that section. Okay, so Bitrise should be doing its thing. Sure enough, there we go. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is add a TableView element to our view controller. So click on the object library here and search for TableView, and we're simply going to click and drag this element into our view. Just in case you don't know what that is, it's an element that displays a scrollable list of data, like rows and rows of data, kind of like the address book on your phone, or yeah, it's used in a lot of different apps on iOS. So you're going to see how we're going to use it today. So here's the TableView element. We're going to have to add some constraints to it. So let's go ahead and click on this menu. And I'm going to make it full screen on all the edges. So I'm adding 0 on everything. But we want to make sure that we don't go under this notch because we don't want any data to be blocked. And we also don't want to have this little bar here blocked. So I'm going to leave everything relative to the safe area. And I'm also going to leave margins checked on. So let's add all 4 constraints, and you can see that it indeed doesn't go under the areas where data might be obscured. Okay, the second thing we want to do is add a prototype cell to this table view. And a prototype cell is simply kind of like a row template. It represents how data might be displayed in this table view. And some table views can get pretty complex, so you can have multiple prototype cells, each one maybe showing a different type of data or displaying it in a different way. And then when you're about to display your data in this table view, you can specify for each row of data which prototype cell you want to use. For our purposes, all the videos are going to look the same. So we're going to have one prototype cell. It's going to have one look and feel, and every single video will use that prototype cell. So what you have to do is click on the table view, click on the attributes inspector here, and you're going to see prototype cells here. From 0, just change it to 1. You're going to get a very basic plain cell. We're not going to customize this just yet, but what we are going to do is give this prototype cell or template an ID so that we can refer to it later on and specify that for this piece of data we want to use this prototype cell. You have to give it an ID in order to be able to refer to it. All right, so click on TableView cell in the attributes inspector. There's an identifier field. For our identifier, you can type anything you want, but just remember what you type in. So I'm going to call it video cell with a capital V and C. So later on, when we have data to display in this table view, we can then tell the system to grab an instance of video cell, with that identifier. So we're going to have to pass that in. But rather than, typing out this ID all the time and potentially creating typos in the process, I'm going to add this ID into our constants file. And that way I can just refer to that constant whenever I want to refer to this ID. So let's start by going into our constants.swift and adding that. I'm going to add it to the bottom of our list here, static var video cell underscore ID, and make sure that I don't make a typo here as I'm typing this, and we'll save it. So from now on, we can refer to this constant. But remember, this file isn't going to be committed into our GitHub repository, right? Instead, constants template is the one that's going to be committed. So I'm going to make sure that constants template also has this constant. So we'll put it right there. All right, now let's go back to our storyboard. So at this point, we're finished with the UI. What I want to do now is just expose my table view as an 𝑖𝑏Outlet property in my view controller, so that when I write the logic, I can refer to this table view and manipulate it. So in the past, what I would do is I would open up the assistant editor, and sometimes on the right hand side you wouldn't get the right file, and so you might have to change it in the sort of navigation breadcrumb here and select view controller. But my friend Chris Parker told me that there's actually another foolproof way to do to open up the assistant editor to the file that you'd like. So what you do is you hold down Option on the storyboard here, and you click on the file you want on the assistant editor. So for us, we want to connect this table view as a property to the view controller. So I'm going to hold down Option and click view controller. When I do that, it opens up assistant editor, or a second window, a second pane, and it puts the view controller in that pane. So now all I have to do is create some space up here where I'm going to add the property. I'm going to hold down Control, and on this side in my document outline in Interface Builder, I'm going to hold down Control, click and drag and let go, and then I am going to call this property TableView. And just like that, I've created that, or connected that TableView element as an 𝑖𝑏Outlet property. I just want to take a quick second to talk about how the TableView element works, because so many of the other user interface elements work the same way. The TableView element is just for displaying data. It doesn't actually contain any data itself. So what it does, when the TableView element appears on the screen, it asks someone for the data to display. Here's how it does that. The TableView element has a DataSource property that is initially empty. If it stays empty, then the TableView has no one to ask for data to display. However, if someone or something sets itself as the data source for the table view, then the table view is happy. But there's a second part to this. The way the table view asks the data source for data is by calling very specific methods on the data source. And in those specific methods, the data source needs to return the required data. If the data source doesn't have those specific methods, then ultimately this whole thing doesn't work. So to recap, two things need to happen. Number one, someone has to set itself as the data source for the table view. And number two, that someone also has to have the specific methods that the table view is going to call when it needs data to display. Now the table view has a secret weapon to ensure that whoever is the data source actually has those specific methods. The secret weapon is called a protocol. And the protocol is like a rule that says you must have these methods in order to be the data source. So the table view uses this protocol. Whoever assigns itself as the data source must also declare that they follow the protocol. And the protocol enforces that the data source will have the specific methods that the table view requires to call. What we're going to do is have our view controller declare that it conforms to the protocol. And conforms is just a technical term to say that it follows the protocol. And now that our view controller conforms to the protocol, we're going to set it as the data source for the table view. Finally, we're going to make sure that the view controller actually has the methods that the table view needs to call. Now I hope that all makes sense. Let's talk about how the table view handles user interaction. When someone taps on the table view, it doesn't know what to do. And unfortunately, you can't write that logic or that code in the table view. So the table view, again, uses the same system of delegation we just went over. It has another property called Delegate that is initially empty. And if it stays empty, then the table view will do nothing with the user interaction. However, if someone has set itself as the delegate, then the table view will call specific methods on the delegate when the user interacts with the table view. Another protocol exists to ensure that whoever assigns itself as the delegate of the table view will have the specific methods that the table view needs to call. Okay, let's go back to Xcode and let's do this. All right, so now we're back to Xcode. Let's close out this assistant editor. Let's go to view controller, and the first thing we need to do is to specify that our view controller conforms to the protocols that I told you about. So let's start with data source. Now, if you did the 29-day beginner challenge before attempting this YouTube app, which you should have done, I warned you guys in the beginning, then you would know to conform to a protocol, you simply add that to the list here using comma. So the protocol that we want to conform to is UITableView DataSource. And that is going to allow us to, in the viewDidLoad here, to say that the data source property, right, we're going to assign ourself to it, which is essentially the view controller. We're going to assign, the view controller is saying that it's going to assign itself as the data source of the table view, which is exactly what we talked about before. And now the third step is to make sure that the view controller actually has the specific methods that the table view needs to call to get the data to display. Now, the protocol ensures that the view controller will have those methods. And the way it does that is just by throwing errors if you don't have the right methods. So you can see here, you click this, it says that the view controller, you know, you're saying that the view controller conforms to this data source protocol, but you don't actually have the right methods. So all you need to do is click fix, and it's going to add these two required methods to your view controller. But we're going to move it to the place we need. So I'm going to cut this code here, and we're going to put it down here. And one way to organize things a little bit is to use this pragma mark, and then you can say table view methods, and that's going to give you a nice line. And also in here you can see a nice separation. But let's add a comment here. So conform to, or set itself as the data source and the delegate. The delegate, right? We also talked about that just now. So the view controller has to conform to another protocol, which is called the UITableView delegate. And this one is for handling the user interaction events, right? So now that the view controller conforms to that protocol, down here we can say that the TableView.delegate is also going to be set to the view controller. And there are no required methods for this protocol, so it's not throwing any errors. But if you do want to handle the situation when the user taps on a row or does something else, then you can write the specific methods here, and the table view will call it if it exists. So for example, if we want to detect that the user tapped on a row, then there is a method called didSelectRowAt, and if we have this method, then the table view will actually call this method when the user actually taps on a row of the table view. And that's all possible because we've set ourselves, or the view controller has set itself as the delegate, right, that handles the user interaction. Okay, but first of all, the initial thing we want to care about is the data source, because the table view doesn't have anything to display, right? So it's going to ask the view controller for a couple of different things. Let's take a look at what it needs. It needs to know the number of rows in the section. And our table view by default only has one section, so we don't have to worry about which section it's talking about. But in general, how many rows is it going to have? So right now we don't really have that data. What we're going to do is we're going to create a property up here, and we're going to call it videos, and let's initialize it to an empty video array. So it's going to have 0 elements in there, and the number of rows is going to be how many videos we have in here, which initially is 0. So we're going to return videos.count. So if there are videos in there, it's going to return the count, however many. So now that the table view knows how many rows it's got to display, it's going to start asking for every single row that it needs to display, what data do I display? What does that row look like? And so it's going to call this method, sell for row at. If you tell the table view we have 0 rows, it's not even going to call this because it has no data to display. But if, let's say, you return 10, let's say you have 10 videos and the TableView knows you have 10 rows to display, it's going to start calling this method for every single row. And you're going to have to see which row it's asking about and then return the appropriate data and prototype cell. And so this is where that video cell, that prototype cell, right, that we configured, this is where that comes into play. This guy right here, it's just basic and empty because we haven't really configured it. But what we can do is, first of all, we'll get a cell. So let cell equals TableView.dequeue reusable cell with identifier for index path. So we're going to use that method. This is which template or prototype cell you want to use. So here we would specify video cell, that ID that we had specified before. But remember, we added it to our constants file, so we can simply do constants.videoCellID. And index path is saying which row are we looking at. That actually comes from this parameter right here. So you can actually just pass in that parameter. This index path object contains a row property, which specifies the actual row. So it could be 0 for the first row, 1 for the second row, 2 for the third row, and so on. Okay, so there's our cell. And then in here, we would configure the cell with the data, which we're not doing right now. And then lastly, return the cell. Give the cell back to the TableView for displaying. And here we just return cell. So this is how that whole system works. If I ran the project right now, we would see no rows because videos.count is 0. Well, in our model, right, we had made that API call and we had gotten back the list of videos. We just haven't passed it to the view controller just yet, right? So one of the ways we can get this list of videos to the view controller is by specifying a return method of this method right here. But that's not really what we want to do, and I'll explain why. But stay with me here. If we specify a return method, a return type for this method, that means that when the view controller up here in view.load, when it calls model.getVideos, it's going to expect to be returned a list of videos. And that is a problem because what model is actually doing to get those videos is it's making a network call that may never come back, or it may take a long time. And during that time, when it's fetching those videos from the API, the view controller is just hung up on this line waiting for the results to come back. So that's why, this is not the way we want to do it. We don't want to specify a return type and do that. Instead, what we want to do is when the view controller calls model.getVideos, we want the model to go off in the background and hit that API and grab those videos. And when the data is ready, then to contact and notify the view controller and pass that data back. And during that time when the data is being fetched in the background, the view controller can carry on with its normal tasks like handling user interaction and anything else it needs to do. Okay, so now you know what we want to do, but how do we make it so? Well, we can use that delegation pattern that we've gone through earlier with the TableView. So let's quickly take a look at what that looks like. So in this scenario, the model is kind of like that TableView element we talked about earlier. We're going to declare a delegate property in the model class, and we're also going to declare a protocol to say that whoever assigns itself to that delegate property must have a specific method. Then in the view controller, we'll have it conform to that protocol that we declared. And then we'll add that specific method that is required by that protocol. And finally, in the model, when the data comes back from the API call and we parse that JSON and we have a list of videos ready, we're going to call that specific method on whoever is assigned as the delegate, which would actually be our view controller. So let's go do it in Xcode now. All right, so let's go to our model class. Now in here, we're going to create some space and we're going to declare our delegate property. Now the type of the delegate property is actually going to be the protocol itself. So we're going to have to declare that. So up here above the class declaration, we're going to declare a new protocol, and we're going to call it, let's say, model delegate. And the requirements, the required function is going to be one that's called videos returned, or how about videos fetched? And the way we're going to actually return that list of videos is through a parameter here. Now I'm going to put the underscore there so we don't need to specify the argument label for the parameter, and the parameter name is going to be videos, and the data type is going to be an array of videos objects. All right, so now in the delegate, the property or the data type of the delegate property is model delegate. And remember, initially it's empty, right? No one's assigned to this delegate property, so that's why it's going to be an optional. So the next thing we have to do is have the view controller declare that it conforms to this protocol, and also to implement and have this method. So let's go over to our view controller, and up here, let's just add to our list, we're going to conform to the model delegate protocol. Right, and then down here we'll create another section. Let's say model delegate methods, and we're going to specify that indeed we are going to have that method called videos fetched. All right, and in here we're going to set the returned videos to our video property, refresh the table view. So we have this videos property up here, right? So we're going to say self.videos, which is going to specifically refer to that property, and we're going to assign into that property the list of videos that the model returns. Videos. And then to refresh the table view, TableView.reload data, and that's going to cause the table view to ask us again how many videos are there, and for each video, what am I supposed to be displaying? So it's going to cause all of these methods to fire. All right, so now there's one last step. We got to go back to the model, and oh, actually, I almost forgot one thing. Go back to the view controller for a second. So the view controller has declared that it conforms to this protocol, and it's also declared that method, but don't forget, we have to set itself as the delegate of the model, right? So model.delegate equals self. And then that way, when the videos get returned and the JSON gets parsed, and down here, when we dumped the response and we saw that we actually parsed all the videos, down here we can call the videos returned method of the delegate, which the view controller has assigned itself to, right? So self.delegate dot videos fetched, and then in here we just return actually videos fetched instead of videos returned. Again, here we actually remember our response class or our struct, it had items as a property, and that was a list of videos, so that's what we're going to return. The only problem is that videos might be nil, or sorry, this might be an empty property. So we should probably check that it isn't first. So we can say if response.items is not nil, then we are going to call this, and we can say response.items and do that. Actually, this one, This one might be nil as well. So let me press Command B and let's build it. Yeah, so it's failed. And okay, so let's just get rid of that placeholder. Press Command B again. Build succeeded. I guess it will return a response object. And if it wasn't able to parse it, then it would throw an error and we'd catch it down here. So essentially, after we've parsed the JSON and we check that there are videos, because this isn't nil, then it's going to call videos fetched of the delegate and pass those videos through. And since the view controller has set itself as the delegate, this method is essentially just calling this right here. So then we're going to take the videos, and we're going to assign it to our own videos array, and then we're going to call TableView.reloadData. So now let's run the app. We will see cells, except that in the cells we won't see anything because they're all empty. So inside the view controller, what we can do is we can get the title for the video in question. So let title equals self.videos. Right, this is our videos array, and the row that we are trying to display, remember I told you it is in indexPath.row, and we're going to access the title property for that video, and then we're going to just display that in the cell for now. So text label.text is equal to title. By default, the default even plain Jane cell has a label. Okay, so that we should be able to see something just like that. Okay, so we did see something, but we also had a crash here. So let's take a look at what. Okay, so the problem here is it's telling us that one of the things we want to make sure to do is to only update the user interface from the main thread, because that's primary job of the main thread, is to handle user interaction and also to update the UI. What's happening is that in our model, when this is off to hit the API, fetch the data, parse the JSON, that's happening in a background thread, right? That's happening in the background. So when we get to this point where we want to return those items to display in the table view, we sort of have to throw that to the main thread to handle. And so the way we do that is we can do that here using this class called dispatchQ.main.async, and inside there you then place the code you want to pass back to the main thread to execute. So it's really awesome that Xcode tells you this now, because in the past it never used to warn you, and so you'd be doing this without really understanding or knowing that that was bad, and it would really cause a performance hit as well. So you want to make sure you update the user interface through the main thread. So let's run this project again, and you can see how much faster it is, and plus the app doesn't crash now, so that's the good thing. Now that we've got this piece of functionality working, let's go ahead and check in our code. Now what I'm going to actually do is uncomment this, and although if I build it now my project fails to run, but remember, when I upload my code or commit my code to the repository, it's not going to add constants.swift. It's going to ignore this file, and instead it's going to add constants template.swift. So we won't have a redeclaration of constants. And the reason I'm doing this is because when we do commit our code to GitHub, Bitrise goes and grabs the code and tries to run it. If I have this commented out like I did, then when Bitrise tries to build and run the code, it's not going to find the constants struct that we need. Because again, constants.swift is not going to be added to the repo. So that's why I'm uncommenting this for now. I'm going to save it, and I'm going to add this. I'm going to add all of that. I'm going to commit. Added TableView custom protocol in the model, displaying video titles in the table view. And I'm going to push that. And refresh this. Refresh this page. Okay, so Bitrise has said that it's failed, but I want to check out why. So let's go ahead and click into this, and let's see if we can take a look at what the error message in here is. Okay, so the problem is because the Xcode project actually does have a constants.swift file in the file list. So this constants.swift file is actually part of the Xcode project, but because we haven't checked it into source control, because we added it to Gitignore, when Bitrise grabs the project, it says it's missing this file. So it's true. So I don't really know how to get around this. It seems like I think what might be the best course of action is if in the future I just make my repositories private instead. In that way, I don't have to have be trying not to commit my API key in to my repository. And instead, I will maybe create a public version of the code base on GitHub once I'm completely finished with the app series. But at least if, during the process of building it and recording these videos, if it's private, then I won't run into so many issues trying to hide my API key. All right, so today you implemented a custom protocol so that the model can send over the video objects to the view controller. You also added a table view and got the videos showing. I have a quick question for you. Did you understand what was happening when we implemented our custom protocol and had the model communicating with the view controller? Let me know by leaving a quick comment below. That sort of delegation communication pattern happens a lot in iOS. In the next lesson, you'll create a custom UITableView cell so that we can display the thumbnail and also the date for each video. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss the next lesson. And on your way down there, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps with getting exposure for the video itself. I appreciate it so much. Thank you for watching to the end, and I'll see you in the next lesson.